Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Streaming Alchemy Show. Hope everybody had a great holiday season and are recovering from too much good food and basically just having, time to relax with family. So it's been great here as well. So I know we're doing a show sort of in the middle of, for what are a lot of people's holiday celebration. So we'll try to be quick. But one of the things that we wanted to do on this show was just cover some of our predictions for what will be happening in the coming year in the space of live streaming. And there were two things. I mean, one of the things when we thought about this is we wanted to be sure that whatever we were going to talk about was really reinforced more as a trend than just a idealized prediction. So hopefully that will provide, a little bit of context. And the other thing is we wanted to be sure that some of the things we were looking at, for being, you know, potentially more important in 2020 to live streamers is that it really focused on a lot of the production aspects of live streaming, whether that's, things that are, the way we broke it up was to protocols or actual production techniques or monetization or just some general things. They all should have a more direct impact on what you're going to be doing with your live streams over the next year. So for a show like this, we know there's a lot of views and opinions out there as well. So we'd love to have you join us. Please just share in the comments, or uh, JS, we'll be getting to that. Thank you. Uh, so, absolutely, this is something, we'd love to have you participate with us in. So, we'd also love to have you call in if you'd like to come on air with us and talk a bit about your own thoughts for 2020. We'd love to have you here. So, let's get started. Uh, if I'm thinking about, the predictions we're going to be looking at for 2020, uh, as JS just pointed out, the first big one is 5G. So 5G is a really interesting technology as a wireless protocol. It gives you sort of the freedom that you would expect from any type of mobile production. Uh, but the thing that it gives that's really the differentiator is now 5G can provide over 1 gigabit transfer rates. And that on a wireless platform opens up a lot of possibilities. So, the first one I think that could impact us directly is we do have folks like LiveU that are looking at, integrating 5G into all of their products. And that's going to allow them to stream in 4K. Now, we'll talk more about 4K and where I see that in the next year. But that first mile capture, being able to do acquisition in 4K is really critical because everything you want to do with taking and processing the images you receive in your studio depend on having the highest quality image available. And so 5G is really going to open up the door for that. I know there are a lot of people that are talking about it as a way to do streaming in, to end users in 4K. Uh, Not sure that that's really going to take off, certainly over the next year. But I do think 5G is going to play a critical role, both in formal acquisition with folks like LiveU, but also with casual acquisition, people who are just taking out a cell phone and capturing something and having the ability to stream that to a backhaul. So somebody who can actually process it and produce it is going to become really, really valuable with 5G. Uh, where 5G is going to take off, teleportation. Yes, I don't have that on my 2020 list, JS, but we'll see if that makes 2021. So uh, where I think 5G is going to take off is with the release of the next iPhone. In the rumor mill, they're suggesting that the new iPhone is going to be 5G capable, and I think that's going to spread the availability of 5G out pretty broadly. Where today it's concentrated in, handful of larger cities. The release of the iPhone, I think, will push that out to the broader regional areas that typically don't get that high speed coverage. So, something I definitely think is going to have a real impact on how we produce in the next year. The next thing uh, I'm talking about is NDI. And we're big fans of NDI. But the point I look at happening for NDI in 2020 is that I think the large broadcasters are going to start to move more productions over to NDI. There's always been this level of resistance uh, where people are looking at it as, oh, yeah, maybe it's for the second tier. It's not really as good as hardwired SDI. I actually think as people look at NDI and as NDI has improved generation to generation, it really is becoming something that in almost all use cases, it is a viable quality candidate for what you need to, send on air. So I think that's one of the big changes we're going to see with NDI coming into to 2020 is that high end adoption. And oh, JS, yeah, JS is mentioning that the lower latency is another benefit of the 5G, which we were just talking about, and I completely agree with that. The lower latency is going to make a difference, and the other aspect is that you have shorter distances that the signal can travel because you're talking uh, a signal that I think is 30 gigahertz. So that's compared to sort of the 5 gigahertz that you normally have Wi-Fi. So I think the shorter distance means there are going to be more access points available or cellular contact points for connecting with the 5G. But the lower latency is definitely going to make a big difference. So thanks for pointing it out, JS. So uh, with the adoption of NDI, though, there's also something that came out in this last release called HX2, which is a lower bandwidth NDI, which has come out. And NDI HX has always been sort of the low bandwidth alternative to full NDI. But with HX2 now, they are reducing the latency even further. So, again, the latency issue coming up. So it will have less latency in the capture and transmission. And they're also upping the quality. So you're going to be able to do 4K. And in fact, if you have the iPhone NDI app from NewTek, that does use HX2 and can stream in 4K. So these features are sort of out there, but I think HX2 is going to have a big impact on the adoption of NDI in a lot of situations outside the broadcast space where people were a little more reticent and now are totally willing to commit. And I think those two things, the latency and the quality boost and support for 4K, sort of tied with quality, are going to be the things that drive the HX2 adoption. So, Remy, this is another thing that you probably heard some about. So, JS is talking about antennas on every other house as something with 5G as well. So, I agree, and we are really excited for where 5G is going to lead us. And some of the things that we talk about, when we talk about things like Remy, which we'll dive into, require having that backhaul capacity to be able to do things. So what REMI stands for is the remote integration model for video production, which is just a fancy term for saying I got people here running a production with cameras somewhere else, but having the same control, the same quality signal coming back that I get as if I had my whole production at that, a venue or, wherever it is that you'd want to be capturing your production. The biggest thing that Remy is going to bring over the next year is the ability for us to produce video, live video at lower cost, where we have things that people would normally be doing that would be, require sending out remote trucks and lots of people, you'll now be able to send out fewer people and really base the core of the production at a central location. So, what makes that possible, though, and the reason this is under the protocol section, is something called SRT. So, SRT is a transport protocol that's starting to gain real traction in the marketplace. And it allows you to take high quality video and transmit that with a fixed latency over the internet and decode it at a remote location to do production work. And this has been adopted, in a couple of places already. And, we see a lot more adoption coming in the next year. But everything that you think about here is going to be something that preserves quality while reducing production costs. And that's going to make everybody more competitive in terms of how value, for the dollar that you can offer clients. One of the things I think that you'll see this in first is going to be some of the peripheral functions that take place in a production. So people who may be doing graphics could, be working remotely. So lower thirds, all the scores, all those types of things. And that would be something now where you could have a smaller crew at a venue and still do a lot of these functions at the remote side. So I'm very high on where Remy's going to get us. I think the timeline is really going to depend on some things like the rollout of 5G. If 5G is something that can permeate the larger locations as well as some of the more rural locations, then these types of productions, especially things like JS was talking about, like run and gun productions, where you can have somebody just move around and capture video from an event as a newscaster or whatever, then you're going to see this become a big deal. So very excited for this as well. And we personally are looking at ways that we could leverage this type of thing in some of the productions we're seeing out there. So the next thing in the production space is 4K. And so clearly 4K production is here. And I think if people are not working in 4K now, that will be something that will happen over 2020, where there's going to be very little holding us to stay in HD on the capture and production side. That said, I still don't think 4K streaming is going to be, this is not going to be the year of 4K streaming. I mean, we are just seeing Facebook start to move to 1080p. YouTube does support 4K already, but I think for where most people are with streams, and especially people that are consuming streams in the mobile space, where they're really watching on their phone, the advantages of 4K as the streaming format still aren't there. And I think that 2021, this may be a very different story, but I think for right now, we'll see 4K as the production standard, and maybe later on, it'll be 4K streaming, but for now it'll be 1080 as the streaming standard. But what I do see happening in this space is the adoption of high dynamic range. So HDR, which everybody that's been looking at, television sets recently, they all see all the different HDR standards. But effectively, that high dynamic range gives you the latitude between the darkest darks and the brightest brights, where you can still make things out, where the darks don't just become black and the whites just don't blow out and become full white. So that dynamic range is critical to production. And it's something that, from a phone or from, modern televisions, people now can gather that. So especially for things like sports where you're often outdoors and you're dealing with bright light from the sky and dealing with what you see on the field. These types of things can really benefit from having a higher dynamic range to work with, and that's going to be definitely something for most people that are in production today can certainly handle it. So yeah, JS is just saying he can see 4K for overscanning. Absolutely. I mean, it's funny they're talking about for the Super Bowl, uh, even though it's still produced in HD, which that's a separate tale to tell. But they are using 8K and even 16K cameras potentially to capture, uh, you know, footage on the field and then just crop in to get the parts they want with that extremely high resolution sort of being the palette they work against to sample down to HD. But yeah, HDR is going to be the big thing, I think, in 2020 for how we do production. Though 4K as a capture is definitely uh, should be standard. And if you're not there now, it's probably something I'd recommend most of you be putting a plan in place to get there by the end of next year. All right. So the next one I want to talk about goes into the production space. And I've heard a lot of people talk about artificial intelligence, and I'm not in the sci-fi space with what AI is going to do in production. But there's a few things that I see now that are really compelling that I think you'll see more fully develop in 2020. The first one is AI and PTZ tracking. So at the base level, there are technologies out there right now that could follow a speaker on a stage as they move across and have no problem with tracking and framing them correctly. Uh, there are actually programs that are probably just at the very early stages, but that are definitely getting field use now with people testing them that will handle things with sports and PTZs. And now, what makes sports so different is that it isn't just simply physical tracking to frame a person or a player. You have to anticipate what that player will be doing. So, if you're doing something where you have football where you're going to have a throw or baseball where there's a pitch, you have to frame that differently for the anticipated motion, and a pitcher will consume more of the frame suddenly when they go to pitch. These are things that camera operators sort of know intuitively if they've been doing it and will do that. AI is starting to pick up some of those capabilities, so definitely something that at the base level I see coming in as a practical tool through 2020. The other space that this could be is something where you want to do things by voice. So JS is saying AI for replacing audio tracks and automated dialogue replacement has been working really well. Yeah, I mean a lot of those things AI in post production I think is already here, and there's a lot of smarts in place. But I think AI in a live environment is also something that can be real. So if you take simple AI, things like we all know from having our smart assistant devices. I won't say any terms so I don't light up everybody's at home, but our ability to ask and get intelligent responses is pretty impressive for a lot of these things. Having the ability to ask for certain things to happen in a production space where you could come back and say, I want a lower third up now or preview a certain camera. Those types of things being done by voice could simplify the job of camera operators or other, support staff in a production space that are, busy with other things that need to get done. So you can take some of the more pedestrian tasks and automate those through voice recognition. So again, these are all possibilities based on where we are today. uh, I'm not talking about sort of robots running productions fully in the background, though that may be a case one day. So you'll tune in here, and there'll be an android giving this talk. But this right now, I think are practical elements in the AI space that we could see become more mainstream in productions through the next year. The other thing, which I'm a big fan of, is gamification. And it isn't really any type of technology per se, but it's the development of productions with aspects that create competition, create goals, create achievements for people where they feel like I've gotten to this next level, sort of making a game out of that space. Uh, and these things actually, as latency has come down, so there are a lot of low latency streaming options available today. YouTube has a low latency mode as well. The reduced latency allows interactivity to take place. And when you can be more interactive with an audience, that interactivity lends itself now to gamification. And there's a lot of compelling reasons for this. It is engaging. People really connect with what you're doing when you have these types of elements in it. It also works very well in corporate spaces. It's a great training tool where you want to get salespeople on your sales team to know about, product pushback questions and how to respond to those, creating a production that's educational, but also has these gaming elements associated with it, motivates the learning process, engages people that are watching it, and overall just creates a more interesting production with material that otherwise could be pretty dry and boring. And anybody who's sat in a classroom knows the difference from a teacher that does things to engage versus ones who simply go up there and sort of talk the book to you, read the slides to you, those types of things. So this is something where I think the technology is there, the opportunities are there in terms of the types of productions people now may be looking at. And it's definitely something for 2020 that I think will become a much more prevalent trend. The next section that I want to talk a bit about is monetization. And this is not the sexy side of, of anything we do, but it's the side that keeps the lights on. So it's something we all have to know. Uh, So, Jeffrey Fitzgerald, thank you for joining us, Jeff. Gamification is a great interactive story between production and message, and I think that that's a big piece to it. There's having that connection with people, and being able to have the people that are a part of your production sort of embrace the message and make it their own. That's something that gamification really reinforces. So yeah, so JS is saying it too. They use gamification with clients for loyalty. So these types of things, I think, are real. It's not just a theoretical thing for people that are actually using it, and it's actually something we want to bring into our productions next year as well. So uh, I think it's something that a lot of people will be taking a look at as they think of new ways for revenue. But when I talk about monetization here, what what I'm really thinking about is how do you maximize the value that you're going to be delivering to your clients when you do a production? And the challenge is if you base your entire value around the technology you're using, sort of execution on a technical solution, you end up competing against something that becomes the common denominator with everybody else. So yeah, I've got all these tech things I can use, and I can stream to all these different locations. You're not really adding a lot of value. And when you sell with, we've got these cameras and we got these switches and we got these graphics elements, you're not really selling to your strength. Uh, and more importantly, you're not necessarily selling to what the client perceives as their need. So you're expecting that the client can translate your technical message into something that relates directly to the value they want out of you producing a stream. And that isn't always the case. There is a saying, I'm fond of quoting this to people, is that people don't buy quarter-inch drill bits, they buy quarter-inch holes. And that's really the difference. If you think about what the person is trying to achieve and package your solutions for that need, you have a much better opportunity available to you for closing those deals and for having that at margins that make sense for you as a business person. Uh, and that I think is the big gap, making that crossing between I can stop selling, enablement and start selling value and goal delivery. So something I've talked to people about is if you work with colleges or do things that they may be looking for outsiders to take care of, it would be the difference between coming and saying I can live stream for you versus I can put a package together for you to raise funds from alumni, and it's going to have these four productions, and we're going to schedule them with sports and academics and social consciousness and overall achievement of alumni's post graduation, something that creates a package where they can start to think this is now about the message I want to communicate, and this is going to let me achieve these goals, which could be I want, more donations from alumni. So you start to sell to what is their goal versus their goal is simply to live stream, which it isn't. I mean, their goal is to leverage live streaming for something else. And as we start to move up that food chain, you can actually, have some real wins there. And I think it may open up doors for you that you didn't have open before. You may find that people are like, oh, wow, I didn't really know the tech, but if you could do this for me, that would be great. So, something to think about as we go into 2020, because I think it's going to become increasingly difficult to simply come in and saying, I'm the guy on the block with the best tech. Uh, you know, Even mediocre tech is pretty good. So, you have to be selling something else, and that has to involve the value the client is looking to receive. Okay, so the other thing when I talk about monetization, Gilbert, Jay Skill was talking. He said the big problem that many live platforms have is the inability to create income streams. Uh, I think that's true. All the big platforms, when it comes to monetization, they're thinking of income streams for themselves. So you're really not in a position where you may get a small piece of the pie they're looking to get, but I think when you move beyond that, there are ads, there's Patreon, there are a lot of other things that you can do, which a loyal following helps if you're doing a series type show or a continuous week after week production. But if you're going in and you're selling to clients and it's a transactional sale, I'm going in to make something. I think selling up the value chain is going to be the way to be more successful in 2020. So one of the things that people talk about sort of up the value chain is esports. It's got a lot of buzz around it. And I actually feel esports is going to be a big thing. And I think 2020 could be the year where it starts to move more into the mainstream marketplace. But I think the money in esports is going to come to the people who really understand what's involved. And esports is not the same as uh, sort of traditional sporting events. There's different time gaps in the way these games, a computer-based game plays out, and what the audience that's live expects, and what the audience that's remote expects. So when you think about esports and potentially looking at that as an opportunity, you definitely should, but it's something where you really need to understand the full scope of what's involved in producing an esports event. Uh, so Yeah, I mean, JS, yeah, esports has sold out, very big arenas. But where I think the opportunity, and so let me, add a little more color to this, where I think the opportunity is going to be is moving downstream from that. Uh, there are high schools and colleges which have full athletic sports programs, which are also looking at esports programs and how to cover that. So these may not be huge arena events, but they could definitely be events that take place in high school gymnasiums with, different players lining up, schools competing. So I think the big opportunity that you see, from, the large sponsored events is going to move downstream in the same way that, some of the attraction of college sports has moved into high school. And you now have high schools that have multi-million dollar stadiums and huge production budgets. Uh, the same thing can happen in esports. What I'm suggesting is that you need to understand esports as the type of production it is, and it isn't just a mirror of traditional athletics, and it isn't a traditional stream. You have to be able to. You'll need to handle replay, but replay comes from, you don't just have two cameras with replay. You can have 18 players playing, and you have to figure out, how do I grab replay from which one of them, and how do I track the action that's going on, because the field is virtual. So lots of things that go into this that you you need to sort of understand the nuance of. But if you do, if you can come in there, you can actually be very successful with this in the next year, based on my feeling here. uh, so, yep, live college broadcast to pubs and other stuff. Yeah, there is this secondary market, and I think this is going to be something that people will find, and it will grow. But the other thing is, this comes back to the last point we were making about solution selling. If you go into a high school that maybe has an esports team, having a package together where you can come back and say, we're going to take care of all these things for you, all these elements that go into this, as opposed to, yeah, we can set up in live stream, just tell us what you want. That's going to be the differentiator. Getting that knowledge, understanding the nuance of the game, and translating that into a package, a solution sale, I think is where there'll be a lot of opportunity here, as you go forward. And yep, it is a growing market in a lot of different spaces. And whether it's streaming on Twitch, or whether it's venues and events that people charge for. So this is really everything that I had as predictions. I don't like the term prediction, because it's too, like I'm trying to fathom what's going to happen. What I really looked at is trends here. What are the different motivators in our industry that can really push us into new directions? And what would be the implication of those trends? So everything from communications technologies, the protocols that we started with, transforming workflows, transforming capture and acquisition. All of those things, I think, are real impactful. Everything we talked about when we looked at uh, AI and the things that can do, that can reduce cost and reduce error. So definitely opportunities there as well. And monetization is what everybody that's in this space professionally struggles with. What is the best way to deliver value? What's the best way to uh, pay a crew, and to have the right number of people with the right skill sets available for the productions we have? So thank you all for joining in, and thanks for the active participation on the show. I'm really grateful for something. Something that is coming right after the holidays, that people are, taking this time to spend with us. Uh, I predict 2020 is having incremental maturation of existing things, and they'll look forward to greater bandwidth. Yep, I agree. There are very few things that are big bangs where it's just a total game changer. Uh, NDI was one of those, and that's why I think there's such a buzz. But I think most of what we are seeing, going into this new year, will be incremental from what we have today, but the opportunities they open up, I think, are going to be real, and that's something that hopefully, as you think about this, you two can come up with, some of the opportunities, and then leverage that as you plan your business into next year. So, thank you all, as I said, for joining. We're going to have a after show. So if you'd like to call in, join us, just muse about what you see going on for 2020. Love to have you here. So we'll go dark and then transition. But before we do that, if you're not going to join us for the after show, I want to thank you all for being part of today's show. I hope you had a great holiday so far, and we'll see you in the new year. This is our last show for this year. So thank you very much. We'll see you in a few. Oh, and just our next show. I almost forgot. Have somebody telling me. Good thing that somebody here is. We're going to have Stephen Hayward on to talk with us about Wirecast 13, which is the new release of Wirecast that came out probably about 4 months ago. A lot of interesting features, a lot of cleanup and streamlining in here. So definitely, a show if you're interested in learning about Wirecast. This would be a great show. And having Stephen on, Stephen, was one of the early pioneers in the live streaming space, from everything he does with the Tech Buzz to stuff that he's doing now with On Social for Telestream. So it should be a great show. So until then, if you're not going to join us, or until the after show, see you in a few. Take care. Have a great week. Hi, everyone. So, uh, like I said, thanks for sticking around. I mean, making uh, guesses for what will happen in the coming years. It's always a fun kind of show to put on. But the reality is, a lot of this comes from just planning as a business. When you think about how you are looking at what you want to be able to accomplish, from your business side, you have to think through where these opportunities are going to be and where current opportunities are starting to move. Uh, it isn't easy. It's one of the biggest challenges this space has, is that it is always changing and transforming. And so things like SRT, which were really early on the radar at the end of 2018, I think those protocols are going to be really significant for how we do business, and who we decide to bring to an event or a venue versus who works back centrally, or potentially, just thinking about it, how people may want to restructure their production business. So we've been dealing with some clients that work with corporate clients. And for them, SRT is going to allow them to set up things like insert studios at the corporate bases of their clients and centralize all the production. Uh, so this gives them now a totally new way to generate revenue, and simplifies their clients' lives, because they don't have to have executives or other people that are experts sort of participate. By coming to their venue, they can now just walk downstairs in the corporate office and get on camera. So Tony, hi. Thank you for joining us here. So he said the way for NDI matures from a setup standpoint. Uh, yeah. So getting NDI set up, it does require a level of networking knowledge. It's getting better. Uh, and there are a lot of people who have lots of different opinions on the best switches. I can tell you what we use and sort of go from there. But for us, we use Ubiquity switch hardware, and all these switches are managed switches. So, sort of made one general guidance, it would be you really want to be part of the managed network space so you have more control over how you configure and set up uh, the switches in your architecture. But what's right for you is really going to depend on the complexity of the infrastructure. Are you doing multiple subnets that would be, you know, spanning multiple studios, and you need to segment that sort of traffic? Uh, what sort of, controls are you going to have from a backbone point of view? Do you need to have 10 gigabit switches behind 1 gigabit switches as sort of a central hub for distribution? So it's not an easy question to answer in the abstract, uh, but what I can say is we've used Ubiquity hardware. It has great configurability. It, for us, has been very reliable. And it's really a question of organizing and setting up the network, isolating the network to make sure it only has your NDI traffic on it, because you don't want to be having, file transfers or people doing graphics or for NAS for the next show. You don't want any of that on it. This should be isolated. So some of it is the hardware itself, some of it is the architecture you use, and some of it is just the discipline you put to saying what traffic goes on what components in my network. So I know that's not a really complete answer, Tony, but hopefully it gives you enough of a thought process for what goes in behind it. But again, this is something where if you want to share, more of what you're looking to do with NDI and how you think your workflow would look, I'd be happy to talk about it internally here and see if we could come up with more concrete suggestions that might work for you. But no, but that's good. I think the move to NDI has been this sort of transformational move for people, and it opens up a lot of different opportunities for efficiency, for flexibility. Because if when at our last show, Chris Burgos was here from NewTek, and we had to set him up with a lot of different gear. And between NDI uh, and Dante, we had no problem at all just adding his new hardware, bringing that into the studio, bringing return audio back to him, bringing in his mic. All these things now, because it was all IP, didn't require new runs or anything special. We just had one network connection here in the set, and everything else was handled, through that. So it was really great for us. So, so yeah, I mean, Tony's calling out that there actually are colleges now that are focusing on this, and that absolutely makes sense. If you're in video production seriously today, you're in the IT space. So you have to become a bit of a computer nerd. So the engineering is changing, but there's still the engineering. There's going to be nothing that's going to be turnkey. So the fact that colleges are actually starting to teach networking specifically around video production is totally logical. Uh, Video production as a IP-based video production has very unique demands from traditional IT, where there tends to be a lot of small data moving around, and the time criticality of it isn't there. In video, it is less, but very big data chunks moving around, and they have to be delivered in time, in sequence, within a very small, time window, very small latency from, origination to delivery. So it requires not just a different understanding, for programmers and people that actually process this, but also in the architecture of networks, because every hop in a network adds new latency. Uh, Things where you want to route between subnets. Those can add latency. So you may look and say, I need level 3 switches, which sort of have a built-in routing capability versus level 2 and external routers because there's fewer hops, less latency. So all these things, have a play in this. And also the use cases have a play in this because you're dealing with people that may be looking at doing IMAG, where it can't be much latency at all between what people see on a screen and what they would see on stage. So those types of things, we require very specific setups from an IT infrastructure point of view. So definitely something here that I think is it's important that we start to recognize it as a distinct discipline from traditional IT. So, if anybody wants to come on air, or anybody has any other of their own suggestions for what we maybe do, we'll wait around a few more minutes. So, I mean, the other thing, as we talk about this, we did mention HDR, and that was something most people look at HDR as something that is sort of inherent with 4K, but it is a totally distinct space. Oh, well, Tony just came back and he's talking about NDI monitors and projectors. So, yep, I think what you've seen this past year, which is really cool, is decoders have come in now for NDI as separate devices. So, I know Bird Dog has it. I know Magewell has that. And interestingly enough, and this is something we'll probably demo at some point in the future, you can get an app for your Apple TV, which will read an NDI stream and display it. So you actually, all of these things, the advent of decoders is really moving us to, baking this type of technology into the monitors themselves. It is, after all, software. So the ability to bake that in is a software proposition. If there's enough processing power in the device, the smart TV device or the smart monitor, the ability to take in NDI is absolutely there. And it was really impressive when I saw the Sienna is the one, by the way, that makes the app for the Apple TV. So that stuff is great. And having monitors that can just take an NDI feed, we're doing some studio rework, and having NDI based monitors, we'll be using decoders, but that's a part of what we're looking to do for our 2020 edition of the studio. Uh, so yeah, I mean, Tony, the ability to, I mean, NDI, go beyond the video and the audio piece, has a whole data channel and control element to it as well. So that is something that opens up so many possibilities. So yes, I think, if you could do that, control the monitors, control the sources that are being pulled in, and swap them around as needed, that would be something fantastic to see next year. So the Bird Dogs, Magewells, Sienna, NewTek, if you want to come out, smart decoders with a lot of these features, that's something I think we'd all love in 2020. So, all right then. So I think we've probably covered everything. Thank you all for joining us, and most importantly, I wish everybody a really great, safe, and prosperous new year. And we'll see you January 3rd for our next show. Take care, everyone.